If you're running a small business like I am, you know time is money. I often find myself scratching and clawing just to finish everything that I need to do. Inefficiencies are unaffordable. So I'm constantly evaluating my processes to save both time and money. I did a video a few months ago showing the process of how I go about making these 100 wooden trays. I've been selling these wooden cracker trays wholesale to the same retailer for over a year now. I've made over 500 of these exact trays, and this order is no different than the previous. It's the same quantity, design, and wood species. These similarities will enable us to see the differences between the old process I was using and this new process that I'm going to try. The new process involves using the bandsaw and the router table a little more, but before I get too far into the new process, it's important to understand my old process. Let me recap that process really quick for you. I start with 1-inch thick rough sawn black walnut. Then I use a combination of my table saw, miter saw, and thickness planer to make pieces that are all exactly the same dimension. This makes the CNC process easily replicable. I take the pieces over to my CNC, lay them out in a specific pattern that matches the way I have the tray set up in my CAD software. If you're interested in learning the details of how exactly I set this all up, I have a video where I go into that process in more detail. I'll leave a link to it in the description below if you want to check that out. After using screws to secure the pieces to my CNC bed, I run two different tool paths. The first is to carve out the concave tray area. I do this with a bowl and tray bit to a total depth of a 1/2 inch. Once that toolpath is finished, then I swap the bit out for a up-down, or also known as a compression bit. This toolpath is the outside profile cut that cuts the shape of the tray. I use tabs to hold it in place while it's being cut. Once the CNC is finished, I use an oscillating multi-tool to cut the tabs and free the completed tray from the rest of the wood waste. At this point, I have a tray that is its general shape and needs finishing. The first step in finishing is to sand the edges smooth with my oscillating belt sander. This removes the rest of the tabs that weren't cut by the oscillating tool and any tool marks on the side of the tray left by the up-down compression bit. Once I have a smooth edge, then I head over to my router table and put a round over on all the edges. Then I do any final sand needed and apply wood finish to finish the tray off. Okay, so that's the process that I've literally done hundreds of times, and it works well. So you might be wondering, if it's not broke, why try to fix it? But once you do the same process hundreds of times, you start identifying inefficiencies or getting ideas if, oh, I wonder if that is faster, or I wonder if this is faster. So I started wondering, I wonder if I didn't cut all the way through the tray on that profile contour cut, and I used my bandsaw to cut the rest of the way through, and then used a flush trim bit to flush up the whole tray. I wonder if that would be faster than letting my CNC do all the work. So the new process goes exactly like the old one, up until we get to the CNC toolpaths. And actually the bowl and tray toolpath is exactly the same as well. But the profile toolpath, the one that cuts the outside perimeter of the tray, instead of having it cut all the way through the profile of the wood, I set the toolpath to only cut halfway through the wood. So since our total thickness is 3/4, half of that is 3/8. This does a couple things. It gets rid of the need to use tabs, but more importantly, it cuts the machine time down by 16 minutes per set of 8 trays. Next, I take the trays over to my bandsaw to finish cutting what the CNC did not. I just follow the path that the profile toolpath made, trying to stay as close to the inside edge as possible without hitting the actual tray. With a flush trim bit inserted in my router table, I flush everything up with the profile that the CNC made. If you're not familiar with how a flush trim bit works, it has a bearing at the top of the bit that rides along the profile that the CNC cut. And as you push the tray through the router, making sure to keep the bearing touching the side of the tray at all times, the bit flushes the part that the bandsaw cut with the part that the CNC cut, leaving a smooth surface. The rest of the process is exactly the same as the first process. All right, real quick, I typically don't ask people to subscribe to my channel because I think it's annoying and I think it's overdone. But I have a goal of hitting 50,000 subscribers. That's just crazy to me. But I have a goal of hitting that number by the end of this month. So if you're not subscribed and you're getting value from this video, can you please hit that subscribe button below to help me out to reach my goal? I appreciate it. Okay, so let's break down the time each of these processes take. Saving 16 minutes over 8 trays breaks down to 2 minutes per tray time savings. I also save the time it takes to cut and sand the tabs and edges of the trays. This takes roughly 2 minutes per tray, with most of that time being spent sanding. So the question is, does the bandsaw and flush trimming take 4 minutes per tray, and does each process yield the same quality? I found that the new process can be done in about 2 minutes per tray. Basically the same amount of time that it takes to cut the tabs and sand. The 2 minutes is pretty much split evenly between cutting them out on the bandsaw and flush trimming. The new process also produces a slightly better product by removing every tool mark in the side wall of the tray. Even though I'd sand the tool marks out before using my oscillating belt sander, it was always hard to get them out on the corners. Since the bearing rides along the profile of the tray, it does a much better job of cleaning these corners up. Whatever tool marks the flush trim bit doesn't reach, the roundover I put on the edges does. All right, so how much time did I save over the entire 100 tray order? I saved a total of 3 hours and 20 minutes. That is huge. I think it's safe to say that I'll be using the new process from now on. Besides the time savings, there are a couple other important things to consider. With the old process, you have to worry about your tabs possibly breaking loose when the CNC is working. If you had that happen before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. With the new process, that possibility is eliminated because you're not cutting all the way through the profile of your stock. I also learned something else with the new process, that it is really important to have a fresh, sharp flush trim bit. I started out using an old, dull flush trim bit. I didn't know it was that dull, but when I put a new one in, it eliminated the problem. So as you can see, when you're making 100 of something or many of something, it doesn't take a big change in the process for time savings to really start adding up. Or it can work the opposite way, where if you're doing something that takes longer than it should, it really multiplies on itself. So all this time savings is money in my pocket and time I can spend doing other things in my business. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these two processes down in the comments below. If you got any questions, be sure to ask, and I'm more than happy to explain something more. If you haven't seen the original video where I go through the old process of making 100 trays, this video will probably make a lot more sense to you if you check that out. You can check that video out right here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.